So let's think about some general questions about the nature of knowledge then. If knowledge is true opinion plus an account, or what we might nowadays call a justification, we might still be left uncertain as to what it is possible to know. And one way of putting it would be colorfully, so to speak, are all my statues tied down? After all, many of the things in the past that I was certain of, I now know to be doubtful. There are lots of things that I believed when I was a kid, for example, that I took as obvious, but that I now think are probably untrue, certainly not well supported at the time that I had those beliefs. And we might look at my current belief system and ask, well, what else of the things that I believe now, what else might have to go? This is a question that was central to the thinking of René Descartes, who was a French philosopher mathematician. His dates were 1596 to 1650. He's a scientist, mathematician, and a philosopher. He invented analytic geometry. He was known, his name is behind, and he was the inventor of what we now call the Cartesian coordinate system. He had interests in optics, meteorology as well. Very important scientist, mathematician, not just a towering philosophical figure. And he's commonly credited with initiating the so-called modern era of philosophy. In philosophy, things don't change very fast. The movement of the field is relatively glacial, and what we now refer to as modern philosophy began with, roughly speaking, the earlier part of the 17th century, including the writing, and very significantly as a result of the writing of René Descartes. And Descartes was also a little bit cagey with some of the things that he said, perhaps because he was wary of the fate that Galileo had suffered down in Italy. Galileo was subject to the Inquisition because he raised issues, propounded theories, made scientific discoveries that seemed to violate the teachings of the Catholic Church at the time. Descartes may well have been covering himself a little bit in some of his writings in order to keep from being persecuted as well. Now, in this book that we'll be reading for this course, the Meditations, he had a number of aims. He was interested in using reason to establish the doctrine of theism. He wanted to prove that the mind is a distinct kind of substance from the body. And he wanted to use part of his method to demand that the mind be free from prejudice and withdrawn from association with the senses, in the process of which he wanted to champion an alternative to empiricism, namely rationalism. Rationalism is a famous contender with empiricism for an adequate theory of the nature of knowledge. It's the doctrine that proper use of our reasoning faculties can give us the information that we need about our nature, about right and wrong, about mathematics, and perhaps in some way even about the external world, which is not to say that our sensory information or our sensory experience is irrelevant to the nature of knowledge, but it's a very far cry from providing knowledge on its own. It needs a great deal of intellectual refiguring and reformatting and clarification and refinement before we're able to count as having anything like knowledge. This rationalist doctrine is associated not just with Descartes, but with major philosophers who were greatly influenced by him, including Spinoza and Leibniz. Rationalists emphasize the use of reason, but of course few would deny that we get any information from sensation. Sensation, rather, is the raw material on which reason will often work, but it's never sufficient on its own to provide knowledge.